Now we are out of the bay where the water can become being treacherous. In the 1850s, a number of lighthouses were built along the California coast to help guide boats into the bay. 3 of the lighthouses are still here in the bay. But even with lighthouses, buoys, and foghorns, navigating the narrow harbor entrance is no easy feat. Thick fog, shifting currents, and overly old captains resulted in shipwrecks. In 1901, the wreck of the steamer City of Rio de Janeiro was the worst local maritime disaster ever recorded. The steamer usually transported Chinese immigrants across the Pacific. But in February 1901, there was an American diplomat aboard. He was returning to attend President William McKinley's inaugural ball in Washington, D.C. The ship was already 2 days late when it arrived in the bay, so Captain William Ward decided to proceed through the Golden Gate in heavy fog. In the early morning hours, the Rio de Janeiro struck the rocks. The ship did not have watertight bulkheads, and it sank in a mere 10 minutes. Many of the 210 passengers and crew were below decks and couldn't escape. 128 lives were lost. The sea can be dangerous, but you might be grateful that we are out on the water right now, because one thing San Francisco is famous for is surviving earthquakes. Look at the city skyline. The Great Quake of 1906 began at 12 minutes past 5 a.m. on April 18th, when the earth rumbled and rolled and knocked San Francisco flat. In 1906, the quake was bad, but the real disaster was the fire that followed. Look at the pointed spire of the Trans-American Pyramid near downtown. Imagine that entire area engulfed in flames. And not just a firestorm. It burned for 3 days and 2 nights. By the time the fire burned itself out, much of San Francisco's once proud downtown was little more than rubble. 28,000 buildings had been destroyed, and 250,000 people were homeless. Tens of thousands of San Franciscans lived for months in tents while the city was rebuilt. The damage was awesome. But in just 3 years, 20,000 new buildings went up, and San Francisco was back on its feet again. Its citizens knew that their city could survive just about anything. The Great Quake of 1906, San Francisco's worst earthquake, was certainly not the first, and unfortunately, not the last. Look out the windows toward the city and the Marina District. The earth shook again in October 1989, and it was the Marina District that suffered the greatest damage in that quake. The man-made land reclaimed from the bay rolled like ocean waves, and buildings collapsed into rubble. Stuart Brand was driving his car there when the earthquake struck.
Just happened to be driving down Marina Boulevard. Suddenly, I felt the steering wheel drawn out of the car as it was swaying.
Lee Kang-wong was also here during the quake of 1989, which struck right about dinner time.
I was just about ready to cook my rice, and all of a sudden, the walls and the chandelier began to tremble, and my husband yelled at me, "There's an earthquake." I just stepped under with the doctor table. I took all that I got, and we didn't have to that night.
The one and only Alcatraz Island. It's directly ahead. Once, the only creatures that lived on that barren rock were flocks of pelicans. In fact, that's where Alcatraz got its name. The Spanish named the island after the pelicans, Los Alcatrazes. The U.S. Army decided Alcatraz Island was the perfect place for a fort to defend the bay from invaders. But this cold and windy rock was such an unpleasant place that they changed their mind. It was now the perfect place for a military prison, and eventually a federal penitentiary. It was a time when gangsters were becoming heroes to people. The government needed to send a message that crime did not pay, so they created Alcatraz, the very last stop in the country's prison system, a place to send the worst criminals of all.
Yeah, my name is Leon Whitey Thompson. My number was 1465, AC 1465. I was a man that had total hatred in them days. I hated anything that walked the call on this earth. And when you got a man like that in prison, you got to get rid of him. And that's what they did. They shipped me to Alcatraz.
These were hardened kidnappers, bank robbers, killers, men so dangerous. When the first village arrived by train in 1934, not one was allowed to step down onto free soil. They simply loaded the train cars, one by one, onto barges, and floated them out to the island with the inmates chained up inside. Rumor was that if a man died on Alcatraz, his corpse would leave the same way, stone cold dead, but in chains. With men like these, you could never be too careful. The building you see on top of the hill was the inmates' new home, the Alcatraz cell house. One described it as a tomb of living souls. Some would stay for a year, others for 20 or 25 years or more. To get an idea of the accommodations inside, go ahead and reach your arms out as far as you can from side to side.